Another announcement. This is a particularly interesting one. So over the weekend, I had the somewhat experimental, masochistic idea to start posting like 90-second clips of my lecture recordings on Instagram. And so I've kind of been doing this on my professional page. And in the last 3 days, my Instagram has like exploded. I'm getting like thousands of followers from all over the country, lots of hate mail, lots of lovely messages too. But if you want to see an example of like what white fragility looks like, I would encourage you to go on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Julius A. Doyle. You know, you can kind of browse the comments. It's still growing, it's fairly new, but there's a lot of fragility in there. It's fairly interesting to see. So I'll just kind of put that out there if you kind of want to see what people are saying in response to some of the stuff that I'm posting. Beyond that, let's go ahead and move forward. We're jumping into chapter 3. And obviously, from here on, we're starting phase 2. So phase 2, we're starting to look at racism in the context of like policy making, and some of the origins of lots of racial identities immigrating to the United States, and how the United States ultimately becomes a kind of melting pot culture that we call it. So obviously chapter 3, we're talking about racism and nativism in immigration policy, right? And a lot of this, believe it or not, has lots of connections back to today. You'll be interestingly surprised. So the way that I want to talk about this particular chapter is obviously we're just going to talk about the racial history of immigration first, and immigration policy. Where did that come from? How did it start? How did it begin? What period did it begin? What did that look like? And then how that ultimately leads into the emergence of what we call nativism politics. And then from there, we'll kind of mix in a bit of this nativism politics with the sort of formation and traditionalization of racism in American culture. How racism fundamentally roots itself as a hallmark of American society, ultimately to the point that it becomes normalized. And then from there, connecting the normalization of racism back to immigration policy, we'll start talking about the whole took your jobs thing. Does anyone know this reference?
South Park.
Yes. Yeah, there's a South Park reference in here for lots of funny reasons. And then ultimately, we're just going to dive straight into it and start talking about immigration policy in relation to the Trump administration. It should be fairly interesting for you. But it wouldn't even be necessarily the Trump administration. We're going to be talking about immigration policy in regards to lots of other presidential administrations too. But this one is just, it just takes the cake. So, yeah, your key terms. These are all of the key terms for your book, or from your book, rather. And I'm going to basically talk about all of these. I almost want to say I have a slide on all of these. Maybe there's like 1 or 2 key terms that I probably don't have a slide on. But for the most part, like I said, even if I don't have a slide on it, all of this is fair game. So just keep that in mind. But I don't think I've added anything to this for this particular topic. Anyway, starting with the racial history of immigration policy in the U.S. First of all, if you recall, right, 1776 was that time period where the United States was officially forming as its own independent body of government, its own independent nation, separate from the monarchical rule of the British, right? And because of that, they kind of had a revolution. And one of the things that aided in their ability to declare themselves an independent country was that there's this giant moat between the United States and the UK that we call the Atlantic Ocean, right? And so in the formation of this country, this very new country that we're calling the United States, prior to this, there weren't really new countries being established or made. If you recall, a lot of the connected history of these new countries that are developing in the Americas, there's thousands of years of history in the old world where, for the most part, yes, they have formed their own countries, but most people just identify relative to where they're born, right? So this very new philosophical question is coming up about Who gets to be American? What is an American? How do we define who is and isn't American? And then ultimately, what are America's core values? So in the core values of trying to move away from monarchical rule and the tyranny and the problems therein, they're centering these principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this new country. And by virtue of centering those principles as a hallmark of this new country, who then gets entitled to those freedoms, to those practices? Who gets to be American, right? And this is a new, very philosophical question that's coming up. It's never been asked before. No one in the old world was asking, well, who gets to be German, and who gets to be French, and who gets to be Dutch, and who gets to... They're not asking those questions because it's just kind of a given, right? And so then in the formation of these new countries, right, that leads to this sort of nativism politics emerging in the late 1700s. Right? Where if we're going to start having debates or conversations about who gets to be American, well, I mean, let's take the logic from the old world that if you were born here, that's what makes you American, right? And so even during this particular period, the 1780s, there's still lots of European immigrants that are sailing on boats and coming over to the US. And they're coming over identifying from their respective places of origin, okay? So the Dutch are identifying as Dutch, the Irish are identifying as Irish, the Italians are identifying as Italians. None of these immigrants are identifying necessarily as American to the same extent that the white Americans whose parents had been in the country for generations and their parents had been in the country for generations, right? There's been several generations of white people that now identify as American. They don't even identify as European anymore. They just call themselves white, right? So at this particular point, these American whites, they don't identify as British. They don't identify as European. And yet you have waves of European immigrants that are coming, and they're somewhat distinct from their American white counterparts, right? So this is kind of fueling this inward migration, these waves of European immigrants that are coming into the Americas, bringing their values, their accents, their cultures, their food, their customs, their way of life. This is kind of fueling a kind of xenophobia, that if we're gonna have these ongoing debates about who gets to be American, who gets to have entitlement to the rights of what it means to be American and the freedoms and the liberties therein, perhaps we really need to start cementing the ideas of who actually is American and who isn't, right? And then in addition to that, you know, under the rule of the British monarchy, America was forced to go to war with French colonies, with Spanish colonies. And so they're trying to draw, as they're forming their own country, they're trying to draw a clear distinction about who they are as a people. And so in the mix of all of this, what emerges naturally is a kind of xenophobia. Does anyone want to give their interpretation of this political cartoon here called The Immigrant? What do you think is going on in this image, and what do you think it's trying to convey? Yeah, sure.
Well, they all have a somewhat similar skin tone, but it's painting the immigrant as different. He's extremely large and extremely stocky compared to everyone else. Mm-hmm. And then no one's outfits look great, but his does look a little bit more unkempt. Just trying to say that he is dirty. He has a knapsack in a box instead of a suitcase. Yeah. It's just, I can see the hints of xenophobia in there and trying to make somebody different. And
yeah, you see the scuff on his arm. He's probably poor. He's bringing his entire life with him. All of these people, for the most part. And then you have these protesting signs here. Oh, he's a menace, for example. Some of these are a little bit difficult to make out, I can acknowledge, because of the size. But they're kind of like, they have a sort of negative or pejorative sentiment towards even the European immigrant, right? And so as by 1790, right, we have our formalized system of independent government, and we need to start passing laws, and we have to be very clear about who is and is not an American. One of the earliest immigration laws, the first immigration law, believe it or not, that was passed in this country was the Naturalization Act of 1790, okay? And so it was an attempt to resolve this ongoing debate about who gets to be American, how are you entitled to the rights of an American, how we feel about these European immigrants coming in, and they're not really American, but they're coming here to try to become American, just as our ancestors did. It was that kind of thing. And the language of the bill is absolutely interesting. This is just the upper half of this particular bill. You're welcome to look up the Naturalization Act of 1790, but I'm just going to read for you what I can read from this, okay? It says, a bill to establish uniform rule of naturalization and to enable aliens to hold lands under certain restrictions. Okay, it says, be it enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that any alien other than an alien enemy, being a free white person, who shall have resided within the limits and under the jurisdiction of the United States for the term of 2 years, may be admitted to become a citizen thereof on application to any common law court of record in any one of the United States wherein he shall have resided for the term of 1 year at least, and making proof to the satisfaction, of such court that he is a person of good character and taking the oath of affirmation prescribed by the law to support the Constitution of the United States, blah, 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 blah. It's wordy, but what does that say? What did you get from what I read there? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, well, I guess alien is just describing anyone that's not like born in the U.S. in this case. And so if they come to the U.S. and live there for 2 years or more, then they can become a citizen.
Yes, and they can become a citizen. But then more importantly, what you see here is this part. What does this part say?
Yeah, they have to be white.
Yeah, you have to be a free white person, right? And so what this essentially did was the passing of this bill, which would have been treated as any other normal kind of law that we know of today, entitles only free white people to American rights and American citizenship, okay? And only those free whites. Now remember what I said about the invention of the term Negro or nigger, right? This comes from the culture of being neighbors with the Spanish, where the Spanish are just using this term colloquially to refer to the kinds of people they were enslaving. And so by virtue of that name kind of making its way in circulation of this early American culture, if they're black, then we're white, right? And it didn't matter at the time if you were French, if you were Irish, if you were Italian, or what have you. It was the fact that by virtue of this cluster of phenotypic traits that we all seem to have, we are not them, and so therefore we are white. This is where the concept of whiteness is not only invented, but then also legally formalized, okay? So now you have in explicit terms a bill that codifies and legitimizes this notion of whiteness and who gets to be white, okay? And so then by virtue of the passing of this bill, not only is it setting the stage for who gets to be an American, but it also sets the stage for like racialized policy moving forward. That if one policy can get passed on the basis of race and racial discrimination, then more laws can get passed on the basis of race and racial discrimination and classifications therein. Okay? So essentially then, only free white persons who had lived in the US for at least 2 years were eligible for citizenship. So what that meant was, you had waves of these European migrants that are coming off of these boats. And so they're not necessarily entitled to be citizens just yet. They're not necessarily entitled to engage in democracy. But after a period of about 2 years, then they're free to do the exact same thing, own land, own property, own slaves, do what they want to do to the same extent that the white people who identify as American now and have been there for generations have been doing, okay? But now this defines citizenship as belonging to white people, which also then implies that it is inherently denying citizenship to non-white people. Okay, so you can see therein how this phenomenon is going to sow the seeds for xenophobia, for anti-immigrant policy, for non-white hate, and so on. Right. So enslaved Africans, they're not free citizens. Obviously, they're not citizens of the United States. They may have been born here, they may have been raised here as slaves, but they're not American. The same then goes for Asians. Right? And we'll get to Asian policy in a moment. But even those Asians that would inevitably come to the United States, crossing the Pacific Ocean and getting off of their own boats, this is where you get the term, the phrase, fresh off the boat, they're not American. They don't get to be American, and they don't have the rights and privileges and freedoms that true, quote unquote, American citizens do, right? Okay? Even if they are born here, okay? So even if they get off of a boat, and then, I don't know, you start a family, you plant your roots, even the descendants of those Asian immigrants are not entitled to American. Do you see how the logic is beginning to apply? Right? Okay. So at the same time that this is going on, hold on to this notion for just a second, you have this concept of manifest destiny. Does anyone know what this was? Did you learn this in high school? What was it? Can I get the mic to...
It's kind of just like this belief that like God or like some power is like telling you to like take new land and like take all these like different things, and that like they're in the right.
Yeah, it's like the sort of white entitlement to the ownership of land, and they truly believe to some extent that God wills this for them to have control of the land, for them to cultivate it, and to build wealth on it, and to what?
Civilize the people.
And to civilize the people who may inhabit it if they're not already pushing them out, right? So you have manifest destiny is like a genuine belief that many white Americans have that like this land is ours, it's ours to control, it's ours to keep out who we want to keep out. And then we can pass laws and we can make laws that allow for us to have power and control over the freedoms, the rights, the privileges, the liberties that are here, and deny them to whoever we want. And in this case, that's largely going to be white people. Okay? So now that philosophy of manifest destiny, before I even move on, has anyone heard the song, "This Land Is Your Land"? That's the manifest destiny song, right? From California to the New York Islands, right? There is an entitlement to this property and to this land. And so even the culture that is developing around manifest destiny is sowing seeds for, this is my country. This is not your country. You go back to your country, you get out, this is ours, right? So it's sowing those seeds of xenophobia. And then ultimately, those white Americans, again, those Americans who are the descendants of white Europeans who had been here for several generations, these people are embracing or beginning to embrace a kind of manifest destiny nationalism, where they're the true Americans, they're the true patriots, they're the ones who hold the interests of American democracy and the sovereignty of the country, and they need to be in control of how the country either moves forward, what laws get passed, what doesn't get passed, and who gets to participate in democracy. Okay. Yes. And so then part of that manifest destiny, or part of this cultural philosophy that is kind of becoming insipid and rooted in the societal goings on of the time, starts to even reflect in scientific racism, where you now have American sociologists, you have American scientists that are beginning to examine racial differences, and somehow they are, in their writings and in their publications, they're starting to even position American white people as somehow being the apex of civilization and the apex of humanity and whiteness, where Europeans are like a lesser evolved form of white people. And then Africans even are now lesser than they, right? And so lots of American ethnologists, sociologists, they're publishing these things, and it's kind of reinforcing these notions of xenophobia, these notions of manifest destiny, right? And so at some point, they start to kind of identify that like racial differences are inherent to the biology of the people. Okay? They're not arbitrary, they're not arbitrarily defined, it's not a social construct, but that by virtue of your genetic inheritance, who your parents were, where you're from, these things make you a greater than or lesser than kind of individual. So it's around this time that where you have xenophobia, you have manifest destiny, you also have the emergence of like these beliefs about racial differences being intrinsic and that even European whites are like lesser than American whites. Lesser valid, less intelligent, lesser capable. They have a kind of, they're like noble savages to the same extent that other groups of non-white people were being painted in the past. So now Americans, particularly white Americans, with the xenophobia, with the Manifest Destiny, with the Naturalization Act of 1790, with these notions of nativism, they now have a scientifically justified basis not only to continue enslaving Africans, to control the breeding of these Africans, to engage in genocide and displacement of the natives, but now they also have the ability or the justification for even engaging in prejudice against European immigrants. And now they're starting to hate European immigrants too. And I want to see if someone can guess why, okay? After 2 years of having immigrated or lived in the US, Europeans get the same rights as the white Americans who have been here for generations. What does that imply? Politically, in relation to our democracy. Yeah, they're equal and therefore they can
Do whatever they want.
vote. There you go. Okay? And thank you. And because they can vote, that means that they're bringing with them their like European values. Is that the next slide? No, it isn't. God, I'm always jumping ahead of myself. Hold on to this notion that the Europeans can vote because I'm going to get there. I promise. I jump ahead of myself. We'll gloss through this. You don't even need to write this down. I just want to say that during this particular period in time, there is lots of violence that is happening. Anti-Black violence, white abolitionist violence, there's violence against immigrants, all of these riots that are lasting multiple days, and the flames that are getting fueled here, it really is just part of the manifestation of Manifest Destiny, xenophobia, nationalism, scientific racism, the conglomerate of these things kind of sowing seeds for hate and animosity, okay? So there were several events throughout history that spell out the nature of society, American society anyway, constantly ending up in warfare or like some kind of combat or turmoil, okay? That's all I want to say there. And then before I get there, if we kind of consider the historical context, by this particular point in time, what you're seeing on this map of the US and the territories that were ultimately annexed and taken, this much of the US is kind of claimed to be a part of the United States by 1822, okay? Or like the 1830s, let's say. Okay, so by 1822, Mexico declared independence from Spain for very much the same reason that the United States of America declared independence from the British. And it's by 1829 then that Mexico begins to abolish slavery within its borders. But for some reason, Texas, or this part of Tejas, was once a part of Mexico, but they had an ongoing relationship with the United States where slave culture, especially in the South, was the norm. So the people who inhabited Texas were also people who relied on slave labor. And by the time that Mexico is abolishing slavery, this particular region of Mexico is like, no, we're not getting rid of our slaves. I don't want to get rid of our slaves. Do you want to get rid of your slaves? Like, no, I don't want to do that. Maybe these other parts of Mexico, they can get rid of their slaves and they can do whatever. But we kind of like what's going on with the wealth we're building here in the US, and we want to keep that. So it's by 1836 that even Texas now is starting to separate itself from Mexico. And they go, we don't want to be a part of Mexico anymore. We're just going to sit here and we're going to be our own thing. But hey, US, we'd love to join you. And so this is how then Texas applies for annexation to the U.S. And that ultimately then the U.S. takes up the part of this part of Texas, and then they get to decide which parts of these states they want to claim for themselves. And then in claiming these parts of these states, they get to say, okay, slavery can stay in these parts of the United States. And so this is how Texas becomes a slave state. Okay, here we go. Sorry for jumping ahead. But by the 1840s, right, you have Americans, especially in the South, white Americans, again, who have been here for several generations, that are thoroughly invested in the institution of slavery. They want to keep slavery. They don't want any issues, and they want laws to protect their ability to keep slavery. But you know what's happening? Europeans and European immigrants are coming in, and then somehow they get to become American in 2 years. And then in those 2 years, they can start voting. And then because they start voting, a lot of them are bringing anti-slavery sentiments. Most European immigrants at this particular point in time were fundamentally against slavery. Many of them were abolitionists because they saw the horrors of slavery. Again, they're people coming from the old world, where it was common knowledge that African people, despite their skin color, are still human beings. And so these human beings are having their humanity violated, right? They're abolitionists for moral reasons, for religious reasons, for philosophical reasons, and then they're bringing their abolitionist sentiments over into the United States, where after a period of 2 years, suddenly they get to vote now. Can somebody give me their interpretation of this political cartoon called The Hyphenated American? What's your interpretation of what's going on here? And whoever raises your hand, can we pass the mic in that direction?
It's like the only half that, like, whatever that American figure, like Uncle Sam or whatever, the only half he can see is the, like, I can't tell if it's the American or their cultural.
Sure.
I think it's their cultural, like, side that only he can see.
Sure. But then what's going on here? And how does Uncle Sam feel about it?
He doesn't like it.
He doesn't like it, and what's happening here?
Like, immigrants are, like, participating in society.
Yeah, and he's pissed off.
Yeah.
And he's pissed off because many of these European immigrants are abolitionists.
Yeah.
They're against slavery. And now they have, for some reason, they get to vote just like these white Americans do. The natives, quote unquote. to be ironic or oxymoronic, right? It's, they get to vote. And so now they're starting to, like, water down the sovereignty of American democracy. Because if you're a real American, true Americans, the real patriots, are pro-slavery. They're pro-racial segregation. They're pro keeping this institution of slavery so they can build the wealth. But now you have this influx of European immigrants that are going, no, slavery is wrong. Slavery is immoral. You should feel guilty. You should feel wrong if you own slaves. This is wrong. It's an atrocity. It's a crime against humanity. They start forming abolitionist groups, abolitionist newspapers. Many of these European immigrants are, like, advocating on behalf of African Americans, and this is what that looks like. So it's creating more political tension than that. By the late 1840s, you have an official nativist political movement emerging, and there's waves of violence now where, like, white Americans are even starting to attack the European Americans. And this is where you often hear, like, some people are saying, well, I was Irish, or my family was Irish, and they came to America and they were persecuted and segregated just like black people. That's absolutely true. Anyone know where I get the name Doyle from? Where is Doyle from? Does anyone know the country of origin of my last name? If you put an O on the front, what would it be? Yeah. Ireland. Can you believe it? My ancestors, part of my ancestry, is Irish. I had and I know this because of the census records in Ancestry.com. My great-great-great-grandfather was named James Henry Doyle, and he was an immigrant from Ireland who was already married to a black French woman before they both migrated to the US, but they came here and moved to Virginia in the late 1700s to work on a tobacco farm. And part of what cemented their relationship was the fact that my Irish great-great-great-grandfather was being kind of persecuted in this way. Now, no, I don't personally identify as Irish, but yes, part of my genealogy is in fact Irish. And that's not an accident. That was, for them, that was on purpose, right? I don't have any pictures of James Henry Doyle, but it's interesting because in the census records they have descriptions. And I know he was a red-headed Catholic, pale-skinned white man with, that kind of large beard, but red, kind of like that. It's very interesting. I don't know if any of you want to go to Ancestry.com, but if you kind of look through, there's lots of census records where you can kind of backtrack your own genealogy. And that's as far back as mine goes before I would then have to go to the Irish government to figure out who's connected to James Henry. But yeah. Anyway, getting back to this, right? They're facing all kinds of racially motivated violence. Okay, and these are white Americans that fundamentally, I don't want to say hate, but they have anti-immigrant sentiments and xenophobia towards these Europeans. Okay, so between 1846 and 1855, you had over 3 million immigrants from multiple parts of Europe that are coming to the U.S., and then none of these people identify themselves as white. They don't even know what that is. As far as they know, it's just a color. It was never a thing that existed in Europe. It was just the place of origin of where you're from. So now suddenly they're coming into the US, and then when they become naturalized citizens, suddenly now they have to identify as white, okay? And so generally speaking, even though they had to identify as white, they still made this effort to identify with their place of origin or their culture or their nationality. So this is where you get the preservation in American culture where people will say, oh, I'm Irish American, oh, I'm French American, oh, I'm blah, 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 and they kind of hyphenate, right? And that's something that people still do today. It comes from that, the pressure to stay in touch with your roots, which may include hyphenating and leaving the American identity as a kind of blank page where you identify with some outside culture and you put your emphasis on that. That's where that kind of comes from, right? So many of them are undergoing the process of assimilation, right? Assimilation is perhaps where you start adopting customs and ideals that are rooted in American culture. And you're not necessarily abandoning entirely your place of origin, your culture of origin, and things like that. But part of the expectation of becoming a so-called naturalized citizen of the United States meant that there had to be some conscientious effort to identify as an American with American ideals and American values and those kinds of things, right? But even then, they're still being racialized, and they're being racialized differentially, where you have Celts, for example, you have Hebrews, you have even Mediterraneans that are somehow being all grouped together under this uniform identity that American is calling white. Okay, and by virtue of being white, it has to do with their skin color, it has to do with their hair texture, it has to do with their place of origin in order to separate them from those black people. Okay, so I love jumping ahead of myself, right? The Irish face discriminations, Italians face discrimination, Jews face discrimination. All of them were lynched. Some of them felt like the only community they even really had were the African Americans who were just kind of living under this racial apartheid as if it were a norm. right? So some of those Irish Americans, some of those Italian Americans started forming relationships with African Americans. Some of them had families or formed families, had children, those kinds of things, and they kind of shared in this collective experience of marginalization from white Americans who were often persecuting them, okay? And so as this starts to become the norm, like it's normal for white Americans to discriminate against those Europeans with accents and who speak different languages and they don't speak English here because we're supposed to speak English here, it's kind of sowing these fears and this animosity towards Europeans that for some reason still get to come here, right? And even Asian immigrants, we haven't started talking about Asian immigrants. It's kind of hard to talk about these things in a sort of orderly fashion. But even the Asian immigrants who are visibly different from European immigrants, it's also sowing xenophobic sentiments for them too. Right? So by the 1870s, again, jumping a little bit back in time, but you can kind of fit it in there, just almost out of nowhere. Like it wasn't like the United States had made like official contact and connection with the Chinese, and then suddenly they're like, hey, you want to come to this country? Yeah, just come and we'll have you and we'll host you. It was just more like you had white Americans that were still trying to colonize and expand various parts of what we now call the continental US. And as they're expanding and colonizing these new territories, suddenly these Chinese people just start showing up on boats. And it's because at this particular point in time, word has traveled around the globe. There's this new place, they're calling it America. If you sail this way, you can get to it. It's really interesting. It's a new land. Maybe you can go there. You can start a new life. You could get away from the political pressures that you're facing over here. It's a new opportunity. So many families in China, they just jump on a boat and they just start going to America. That's what they're trying to do. And like literally, they're showing up on the West Coast. Okay? Now, it's by this time, the 1870s, that Americans are still just trying to develop the West Coast. Excuse me, the West Coast at this point in time is not as developed as much of the East Coast and the Midwest is, right? So now you have waves of these Chinese immigrants that are suddenly appearing on the shores of the US and they're getting off these boats and then they're like, they dress funny, they talk funny, they look weird, they're doing all of these things and it's fueling all of that xenophobic animosity among the naturalists, right? And so now they're starting to see Chinese immigration as a threat to American purity because they don't necessarily have full and complete control over the West Coast yet. And now that you have these Chinese immigrants that are jumping off of the boats and they're starting to build homes and they're trying to start a life here, you've got to compete against them for control of the land. Otherwise, the West Coast is just going to become new China. And do they want that? No. So by 1882, they passed what's called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay? The Chinese Exclusion Act, literally passed by Congress, signed by President Chester A. Arthur, is literally the first bill that is trying to restrict immigrants from coming to the US. Okay? And they're basically saying any Chinese immigrants are like, if you're not like a laborer of some kind or something like that, you cannot just come to the US. You've got to get permission. You've got to get approval. And and if you're coming from China, you have to like just wait 10 years. Give us 10 years to develop the West Coast, develop the land, make it a little bit freer. And then once we give the West Coast their freedom, then the Chinese can come in. Why would they be saying that? That Chinese immigrants can't come into this land for at least 10 years. Yeah. Can I? Where is it? I don't know. Right here. Yeah.
To give themselves 10 years to settle the land and get ready so that there are forces to not make good on the promise.
Yeah. Give us 10 years, we'll develop the land, and then once we have control over it, then you can come. But not before then. Right?
And you'll get 40 acres and a mule.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. Right. So you see this political cartoon here. It says the Chinese wall around the United States. Build a wall between the United States and China. It's kind of poetic, isn't it? Cosmically poetic in a way, right? So now they're saying, yeah, we got to like build a wall. We got to keep these foreigners out. They're coming here to take the land. If they come here and they overwhelm, they're going to take control over it. It's going to become new China. This is ours. God wants us to have this land. We need to take control over it first. So make them wait 10 years. Okay. So part of the Chinese Exclusion Act meant that there could be exceptions, right? And exceptions could be made for merchants, for teachers, for students, for travelers, for diplomats, okay? These kinds of people. You can come to the US, you can't be a citizen, you can't own land, you can't do those things. Why do you think that they would make exceptions for these kinds of people? Yeah.
Because, actually, I'll pass it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, pass it.
So they could still like profit and like make money from like this country?
Yeah, because they're bringing resources, they're probably bringing trade opportunities, they're bringing knowledge, they're bringing valuables, they're bringing their cooking. Now you have new kinds of meals you can eat and enjoy. We want to enjoy all of the fruits of your culture. We just don't want you to become a part of our culture, right? And you to have the same rights and entitlements that white people do. So yes, if you're a student and you're trying to like learn about American culture and you want to legitimize it and go take those legitimate ideas back to your homeland and like, yeah, that will help us to submit our legacy as America. But you just have restrictions therein. So we'll take all of the benefits of having you without actually embracing you, basically. Okay. So by the time we get to 1924, I'm jumping ahead through time, obviously, you get what's called the Immigration Act of 1924, or the Johnson-Reed Act. And part of the emergence of this is because that 10-year period obviously ended, right? The 10-year waiting period. So now with that 10-year waiting period, suddenly there's like another influx, a resurgence of lots of Asian immigrants, mainly from China, but parts of Japan and parts of what we would call Korea that are coming too, but it's mainly from China. And they're starting to come in droves, and they're coming in large numbers. It's like a crisis at the border, right? And okay, you guys can come to the country, but not too many of you. There's too many Asians here, and we've got to do something about this. So ultimately, the Immigration Act of 1924 gets passed, or it's sometimes referred to as the Johnson-Reed Act. That's referring to the president and the vice president. And basically, this was a federal law that prevented the immigration of Asians, not necessarily prevented it, but like restricted it, like bottlenecked it. So yes, we can take Asian immigrants, but we're only going to take a certain number of them. And now we have like a quota, okay? So you can come and you can get on a boat and you can try to get into the country, but if you don't get in under that quota, or if you're on that quota, or you're above that quota, excuse me, we're gonna send you back. I'm gonna send you back home. You tried, it didn't work, sorry. But we just don't want too many of you. We wanna make sure that whiteness is still the majority in the country, and that white people still have control by virtue of their representation and by virtue of their numbers, right? Okay. And this is also the case for Europe, okay? That Europeans, okay, you can get an immigration of Europeans too, but we need to restrict the number of Europeans that are coming in too, because there's too many of them that are coming in. And they're bringing their abolitionism, they're bringing all of these ideas with them. Obviously, slavery at this point was abolished, but they're still bringing like these notions of like racial equality with them. These notions of like, let black people either go back to Africa or have their own section of America where they can just live on their own. And these Americans don't like that. That goes in conflict with this manifest destiny idea, right? Okay, and so because of that, they created what was called the Border Patrol. And the Border Patrol basically polices all of the boundaries around the United States so that we can make sure that even if like there's some kind of quota, we're trying to send people back, there's not people trying to jump off the ship and swim to the shore. There's not people trying to climb over the fence and get into the country illegally and undocumented or things like that. So like we'll create an actual force of people that will police the border in order to keep out these immigrants. Okay, so you can see this paper here. This paper was published May 26, 1924. Immigration bill is signed by president. Japanese ban becomes effective on July 1st. Okay. So basically, the federal government was very explicit about why they're even passing this. Okay, and they go on record, literally saying that the goal of the passing of this act is to preserve the ideals of U.S. homogeneity. Okay? And in this case, U.S. homogeneity is really just white homogeneity. Okay? And I'm sure that paper has something to say about it. Okay? As we move forward, okay, FDR, who was a Democrat. It comes into office after President Hoover, who basically neglected the country in any way he could, especially during the Great Depression. FDR comes in as a Democrat, and Democrats at this particular point were historically a white supremacist party, but most Americans were desperate for help from the government. So FDR kind of comes in and he starts passing a bunch of executive orders. And one of those executive orders was seeing that the American people have a need, but that in a way, racism is kind of getting in the way of that. So he signs an executive order, 8802, which basically says the fair employment and practice in defense industries. He's trying to get more people involved in the defense industries of the government because they are anticipating a war. Who is the war they're anticipating with? By the 1930s. Just say it.
Like Axis powers, Germany.
Yeah, the Axis powers, the Nazis are starting to grow. They're a clear and present threat, and the U.S. needs to be ready for this. And in order to be ready, it's not really helpful to like racially segregate where, you know, the government is mainly comprised of white people and we're not operating at efficiency here. We kind of need more people on board. So start hiring federal programs without discrimination.
Was it also sort of like racial profiling is something the enemy does, so maybe we should stop doing that?
No, at this particular point, it's a culture norm that like we racially segregate everybody. Well, the U.S. is very explicit about it, but it's a kind of culture norm that we racially segregate. It's just that the Axis powers are growing, and in order for the United States to militarily meet the demand, we kind of need to relax on our racism just a little bit. So basically, that's what FDR signs in anticipation of that, okay? And so they start creating government funds that will provide for the expansion and production of lots of wartime products, planes, guns, grenades, rations, these kinds of things, right? Uniforms, those kinds of things. But in order to do so, in order to mass produce these things, they first need to get as many people collaboratively on board. So they start hiring Black people, because at this point in the country, the two most dominant or prevalent populations racially in the US are whites and blacks. There are Asians in the US, but they're still a relative minority compared to these other two groups, okay? So the wartime effort meant that if the government is becoming more relaxed with allowing people of color to go and get paid and work and find lucrative job opportunities that help to contribute to the wartime effort, that meant that lots of African Americans are moving away from the South and towards the industrial North, right? Prior to this point in time, Most African Americans just lived in the South because that's where slavery was concentrated. And many of these African Americans were only really working in agriculture. They were working on the fields. Okay, so now we have to fight the Nazis. Now we have to fight the Axis powers, and we need to mass produce lots of military equipment. So we need all hands on deck here. So black people, we kind of need you. Come up to the north. If you can migrate to the north, we'll work together. We'll start building these planes. We'll start building these guns, building everything, and we'll pay you a better salary than you're getting paid on these fields. Help us to win the war. Okay, so lots of African Americans are migrating away from the South and into the industrial North in search of these jobs. And they're getting these jobs because that was the entire point. But because they're exiting the South, that kind of leaves behind a gap. We still need agriculture. We still need farm labor. We still need food, right? The country still needs to sustain itself, but now there's a shortage of labor. Not as many African Americans work in the fields anymore. Not as many Negroes picking cotton, picking the watermelon, growing the sugarcane, growing the rice. And we need help here. So now the farmers are complaining. They're like, hey, look, we get it. You want to fight in the war. You want to win the war. We don't want the Nazis to come over here and be a threat to America. But like, we need help. And, you know, white farmers are, to be quite blunt with you, white farmers see a lot of the harvesting work as like grunt work. They're the leaders. They're the ones who orchestrate what other people do. They're not going to go in the fields and start picking all this shit themselves. So now they start pressuring the government that, like, if we don't get a fix, if the government is not going to fix our situation and get more hands down here, we're not doing this shit at all. Okay, what do you think the government solution to that was? Use your racism.
Immigration?
Immigration from where?
Like Mexico?
There you go. Okay, because it's the grunt work. Okay, we're not going to try to like create a government bill to get more white people to start staying out in the sun all day, picking all this shit and harvesting it when Negroes have been doing that for hundreds of years. Okay, so maybe since we have more Negroes up in the industrial North and we're mass producing things in these factories, maybe we just start kind of recruiting Mexicans. So the government in 1942, all the way through to 1964, they passed what's called the Bracero Program. Okay, and the Bracero Program, literally bracero in Spanish means like a manual laborer. Okay, and so basically the government is like starting these programs that will recruit Mexican farm workers into the U.S., but they're not offering them a pathway to citizenship. They're not offering them like a permanent residency. It's just more like the US is like, we'll pay Mexican farm workers more than what they're probably getting paid in Mexico to be here for a few years, and they can work the fields for a few years, and then after their time is done, they go back home. They don't get to become American. They'll never become American, but we just need the help. So economically, we'll incentivize that help. Okay? So you start getting these kinds of political cartoons, but also ads too, that are recruiting Mexican laborers onto the fields that African Americans had historically been working on. Right? Okay. And so then with that, obviously, 5 million Mexican braceros are recruited. They are eligible for the program. They get the appropriate documentation to be able to then go into the US and then work these fields. But then there's lots of people who aren't getting these opportunities, and they really want them. Some of them are broke, some of them are poor, some of them want the help. So what do? Maybe you just go anyway. Right? Because maybe you didn't get recruited into the Bracero program, but let's be real. If you show up to a farm and then you go, hey, I didn't get into the Bracero program, but I can still work if you're willing to pay me. Right? maybe they pay a little bit less, or maybe the farmer just pays for that extra labor. It's still extra help. So now the creation of the Bracero program kind of starts the initial phase. It like triggers quote unquote illegal immigration, right? It just kind of starts it, okay? And so now, let me go back. So now you have quote unquote documented and undocumented illegal and legal immigrants that are working these fields. At this particular point in time, is anybody trying to deport them? No. No one cares, because we need that help. And at least we don't have to do that work because they can do it. Okay? So nobody's complaining at this period in time about illegal immigrants and blah, 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 because they're all reaping the benefits of what was documented immigration or undocumented immigration. Who gives a shit right now, right? But then that starts to create a problem where you start getting this influx of Mexican migrants that are just crossing into the US, quote unquote, illegally. And they're showing up to work these fields as manual laborers. Hell, you don't even have to go to the field. How many of you have gone down to the Home Depot, right down the hill here? Right when you drive into the entrance, what do you see? At any Home Depot, really. People who are manual laborers who are looking for work, and if you're willing to pay them, they're willing to help. So it's kind of like that. They just start showing up. Okay? And so now this creates a problem where it's a numbers problem. Holy shit. Now, for some reason, there's like a bunch of Mexicans everywhere. Like Spanish is like, people are speaking Spanish down here and like, oh, wait, hold on. There's too many. What is going on here? Some of them are documented. Some of them are not documented. Which ones are which? We don't know. But like, we kind of need to control this. Otherwise, this is just going to become New Mexico. But no, bad joke. Okay. All right. So in that, now we need to figure out like how to put a cap on this shit, because there's just too many Mexicans here. So the federal government launches what's called Operation Wetback. Literally, that's what it's called. This would be the equivalent of calling it Operation Nigger, right? And Operation Wetback is basically, all right, we need to get these wetbacks out of here. And they're calling them wetbacks because some of them are crossing rivers and their backs are getting wet. I've heard two stories. One of them is they cross a river and their back is wet, and that's why they get called wetbacks. The other one is because they're manual laborers that are working the fields and their shirts are drenched in sweat, and so their backs are wet, and that's why they're called the wetbacks. I don't know which one is true. I couldn't possibly tell you, but that is what I have heard. Anyway. So with Operation Wetback, they're like, we got to control these numbers here. Yes, we want these workers here, but we want you to come here legally. So what do they start doing? Okay, they start trying to like figure out how to like round up all of these Mexican migrants and then deport them and send them back to Mexico. Right? But then there's a problem here. Because, right, the goal is to capture and deport these Mexican migrants, but then some of the Spanish-speaking people are in fact American citizens. So some of those Spanish-speaking American citizens are also getting rounded up and deported, only to then get sent right back to the United States because they're not Mexican. And then you have Mexican people who are documented that are also getting rounded up and then sent back, even though they have their paperwork. And then you have Mexican or Spanish-speaking people that are Mexican but are undocumented that are still not getting caught. So it's chaos. And it's like there's no way Operation Wetback is going to effectively address the problem of immigration by like rounding these people up and like sending them back. And literally it's just, there's no other discretion being used other than do they look like they speak Spanish? Do they speak Spanish? Get them, put them in a cage, and then send them back to Mexico. What does that sound like? Sounds familiar, right? Yeah, like we did that before. How do you not know this? We tried that, right? Okay. Yeah. Wait, Mike, where is it?
Oh, right.
Yeah. Right down here to, please. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks. When did like ICE become a thing? Because I know like that's what I feel like I hear a lot now.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah,
That's that becomes a thing a little bit later. I mean, look up Wikipedia. I don't have a direct answer on that
Okay.
one, but
But is this like all part of like ICE, I guess, or like is
it
that?
eventually leads to the formation of ICE. But right now, it's really just
But what's the difference between like that and like border control that
So-
was like in the 1920s?
Border Patrol is literally the people who patrol the border, and then ICE is the people who are looking for illegal immigrants
Like
in
that,
the country.
like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, they're just using racism to racially profile people, and then on the basis of that arbitrary assessment, we're just going to put you in a cage and then send you back. And so some people are getting sent back, and then others aren't, and then they're still illegal immigrants. It's not like this is doing anything to actually get rid of them. So it was like useless. Yeah.
Oh, I just looked it up. It was created in 2003 after the 9/11 attacks.
After 9/11. So there you go. Yeah, because I was a child, so I didn't really pay attention to politics, but I don't really recall the formation of ICE
Yeah.
in my youth.
And when I looked it up, it said like it was created like millions of years ago, but that was just like
No,
the actual ICE.
it was
not-
more like Border Patrol.
It's like
And
whoa.
then, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no, I think it would be a mixture of like Border Patrol and then federal law enforcement that is trying to do Operation Wetback. If you looked up Operation Wetback on Wikipedia, I'm sure there would be some background information. Somebody is welcome to do that if they want. Okay. So like that just didn't work. So now America has this like problem where like there's these Mexicans in the South that like for some reason they're not supposed to be here, even though this is their goddamn native land. But they're not supposed to be here, and they're illegal, and they're aliens, and they shouldn't be here. They're not entitled to be here. And so then it just fuels like that sentiment. By the 60s, it's fueling the sentiment that like now you have Chinese people that are here, and they're speaking their weird language. You got the Mexicans that are here. They're speaking Spanish. You're supposed to speak English in this country. And then by 1965, you get what's called the Immigration and Nationality Act. Okay. And the Immigration and Nationality Act is partly signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, but he's just like trying to definitively end racial quotas because it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. If anything, it just fuels xenophobia in the country. It's like we're stepping on our own toes. And the reality is that at this particular point in time, whites are the majority in the United States. They literally are. And so because white people are the majority in the United States, why do we need to like restrict these quotas to 3% from Europe? We've got to like discriminate against China and Japan and Korea. There's just no need for it anymore. So we can kind of relax that now. But in doing so, it's still a little bit of a bottleneck. It's just a bigger bottleneck, but it allowed up to 20,000 qualified immigrants to come into the country without racial restriction. And so the signing of this law allowed for increased immigration from all parts of the world, really. But ironically, because it is increasing legal immigration to the United States from all parts of the world, it is also increasing immigration from Mexico. Illegal, quote unquote, immigration. Isn't that interesting, right? So it's like a Pandora's box. Like once you open the Pandora's box, you can't close it. And no matter what you do, it's just gonna stay open. Okay, so that's what happens. Fast forwarding through time here, by the time we get to the Immigration Reform Act, Reform and Control Act of 1986, okay, there is an economic need for manual laborers and cheap labor. And because that cheap labor is like, it's available, it's out there, because there's these illegal immigrants that are here, whether we like it or not, and they're willing to get paid even cheaper than what they get, cheaper than what a legal person would be entitled to get paid, okay? There's a kind of mutual benefit. The undocumented manual laborer gets more money than they're probably making from their home country, and then the farm owner, the landowner, gets cheap labor for the work that they need help with, okay? So they have an economic need by 1986 for like these undocumented immigrants, and it becomes this thing where now farm farm owners, landowners, are actively seeking out undocumented immigrants for their labor. They're not even going to legal immigrants anymore. Okay? Because it's just economically, it is in their benefit. Okay? So they pass this thing, this bill that basically says, okay, just this once, everybody here who's already been in the US and they're undocumented, they can now be citizens. But from here on out, if you come to the US and you're undocumented, you're not a citizen. So they're trying to like just basically go, okay, we can't get rid of this immigrant problem, but maybe we can stop it by just resetting the scenario. And so if you're here undocumented, all right, fine, you're a citizen, you get to be here. The farmers aren't going to let you go. Farmers aren't trying to get you to go back to your country. There's no way for us to get you out. All right, fine, you're an American citizen. You're here now. Be here. Okay. So Ronald Reagan basically passed this law, signed it into law, which basically legalized undocumented immigrants to essentially be U.S. citizens if they had arrived to the U.S. prior to January 1st, 1984. So if you've been here for a few years, you can prove you've been here for a few years, even though you're undocumented. We're not going to deport you or anything. Congratulations, you're a U.S. citizen. Okay? But then at this point, this law also made it illegal to hire undocumented immigrants in the future. Yeah.
Was he trying to get extra votes for the next election?
I mean, politicians always kind of sow the seeds for, trying to keep their political power in whatever ways they can. So it's entirely possible that part of the reason for passing this was political, but the other part of this was trying to resolve the issue of like immigration. That is impossible. It's impossible to use your forces to try to round up human beings and then kick them out and keep them out. It doesn't work, right? So the only effective solution is, in order for you to reinforce the boundaries of your country and the nature of who gets to be a citizen in that country, is maybe the only effective solution is to kind of compromise a little bit and just say, okay, if you were here prior to January 1st, 1984, undocumented, you're a citizen. But after this point, if you're an illegal immigrant, you can't be hired here and you can't be a citizen anymore, or you're not a citizen, right? And you're not eligible for citizenship. Okay, so this led to these kinds of fierce debates because, come on, like first of all, there's the argument that they're native. This is their native land. They were pushed out, but then more importantly, that's not going to solve the problem of like undocumented labor being cheaper than documented labor, which is still going to incentivize illegal immigration anyway, regardless of whatever fucking arbitrary date you can put up here. That's just not going to happen. Right? Okay. Okay. So then that starts to create the took your jobs rhetoric. Okay. And I want to show you this video. How many of you have seen this episode of South Park? Oh, 2 of you. Wow. Maybe I'm showing this to a different generation. Okay. South Park is satirizing immigration here, but usually in satirizing things, South Park really actually does a very good job of speaking to the issue accurately and honestly. So just watch the video and then we'll talk about it.
Still more immigrants from the future arrived at the time border today, some even bringing their entire families. The purplish goo that they have on their bodies when they arrive is an ectoplasmic side effect of the time travel process. This is all giving scientists a great opportunity to learn even more about American life in the future. Chris Hall joins us now. Chris?
Yes, there are incredible things we're learning about Americans in the future, Aaron. It appears that in the future, Americans have evolved into a hairless, uniform mix of all races. They are all one color, which is a yellowy, light brownish, whitish color. And it seems race is no longer an issue in the future because all ethnicities have mixed into one. Perhaps most interesting is how this has affected their language. That people in the future speak a complete mix of English, Chinese, Turkish, and indeed all world languages, which sounds something like this. Back to you, Aaron. Apparently the people from the future are having a pretty easy time finding work. Since they offer to work for such low wages, they're being hired all over America.
This bullcrap! Well, I ain't standing for this. Well, what the hell? All right, folks, my name is Daryl Weathers, and I'm with the Construction Workers Union. I work with a lot of fine men who have families to feed. I don't know about y'all, but we worked long and hard to get our pay up to a level where we can make a decent living. And now these people from the future are showing up and offering to do the same work for next to nothing. They took our jobs. We're in the moving business. 14 years we've been working our butts off. Now these future folk come in and we can't get work nowhere. Well, they took our jobs. They took your jobs. Yeah. What about us in the fast food business? The restaurants are firing us because the future people work for a lot less. They took our jobs. They took your jobs. They took your jobs.
It's affecting kids too. Me and my friends started our own snow shoveling business. We were trying to be responsible and make money, you know? But then the people from the future came along and now we're out of work too. Oh, they took our jobs!
They took your jobs! They took your jobs! They took your jobs!
So you can see the parallels, right? Of it opens up a Pandora's box of cheap labor will incentivize illegal immigration, and it's because the people, the landowners, the producers need that cheap labor in order to maximize their profits. So it creates a phenomenon where illegal immigration kind of fuels this ongoing crisis, quote unquote, and then this is kind of the outcome, right? So South Park is like satirizing it, but they're clearly making fun of this like ongoing real political dynamic that ultimately becomes kind of politicized in its own sense, right? So the Immigration and Reform and Control Act, like in igniting those debates about why is it that like this arbitrary deadline, they get to be citizens and then after that they don't get to be citizens, it starts, the debates are not necessarily about the presence of Americans, but about the fact that they're settling in the US. And they're settling on white people's land. And it's not that explicit, but that's the implication, is that this is our land. Why do they get to come here? Why do they get to settle here? Why are you incentivizing that? And there were a few angles of the debate that were kind of emphasized. The first angle is that like they're stealing jobs. They took your job, right? They're taking our jobs and they're stealing the work that we want to do and the work we're willing to do, but we want it for a decent pay so we can afford to pay for and support our families. But then they come here and they take our jobs, and it's kind of laying claim or entitlement to like employment opportunities that technically can go to anybody, but that becomes racialized too. So now you have this phenomenon of like, what jobs are white people entitled to? Right? What jobs are Mexican people entitled to? That like that whole dynamic becomes racialized too. And then because Ronald Reagan is making these immigrants come here and they get to be citizens, that means that they're eligible for welfare benefits, for Social Security benefits, which then means that they come here and they mooch off of the system and then they don't want to work. You see that? So that becomes an argument too, where like these immigrants want to come here and they want to mooch off of the system and they want to take advantage of the benefits of being American without actually being American. And they're taking your taxpayer dollars and then going and having kids, having parties in their backyards. They're not even doing anything here, right? And then they come here and they bring their Spanish speaking, they come here and then they go into these racially segregated communities and neighborhoods, and they're not even willing to assimilate into American culture. Some of them don't even speak English. They have no interest in speaking English. We speak English here, right? These are the kinds of arguments that are being articulated, okay? It's kind of symbolized by Schrodinger's immigrant. Has anyone heard of Schrodinger's cat? You know this thought experiment? right? A few of you, right? And with Schrodinger's cat, it's like a 50-50% chance that if you put this cat in a box and you close it and you can't see what's going on inside and there's poison in there, you don't know. There's a quantum reality in which that cat can both be dead and alive. It's kind of like Schrodinger's immigrant here is the same kind of thing where like somehow immigrants are like lazy and they're mooching off of the system and collecting all of the welfare, but somehow at the same time, they're like taking all of these jobs that somehow just belong to white people. So like, what does this reveal to you? What does this show you? You have people that are simultaneously arguing that these lazy immigrants are coming here and mooching off of the system and taking your taxpayer dollars while also simultaneously taking your jobs too.
It's just a part of American contradictions. Like, you need to speak English, but we're not English here. You're lazy, but you're also taking all the jobs. You're uncivilized, but if you work in my house, you can set the tableware for dinner.
Yeah.
It's just saying that you're all these different things at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And in essence, it's just racism. It's just literally centering racism, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's nonsensical, even if there's no way that you can rationalize here the logic or the frame of mind for somehow an immigrant both being lazy and hardworking. It's a way to rationalize stigmatizing these people from even being able to just come here in the land that they are indigenous to or native to, right? So by the signing of this act, more Mexican immigrants, they become permanent settlers, permanent residents in the United States. And then because of that then allows them as permanent residents of the United States to potentially invite their family members to come through and immigrate to the US as legal citizens or go through the legal provisions necessary, right? So then that fuels more Mexican immigration, which then fuels more anti-Mexican xenophobia. Because now Mexican people who are legal permanent citizens of the United States have the ability to give their family members or incentivize more Mexicans to come here by inviting their family members now. So now white people, conservative people, they're pissed off and they're freaking out because now there's more Mexicans coming here. And they're going to be taking your jobs, and they're going to be taking your welfare, and they're going to be trying to like make this part of America like Spanish-speaking America when that's not our culture, and they need to like come here, they need to speak English, and they're like a danger too. They're rapists, they're criminals, they're abusers, painting them in whatever way is convenient for the political narrative of trying to keep them out. So racialized fears around immigration kind of emerge, okay? Fast forward to 1996, by this point in time, I'm about 5 or 6 years old. You have a Legal Immigration and Reform and Responsibility Act, right? And this signing of this act is basically trying to deny social benefits, social welfare, these kinds of things, and even the ability to go to school to undocumented migrants. So like the passing of this bill basically tries to make it so that if you have no documentation, you can't go to school. If you have no documentation, you can't get access to government benefits that would allow you to sustain your life here. Okay. So by 1996, I forget the exact reasoning, but by 1996, this bill was ruled to be unconstitutional, and then it was struck down. But there were lots of angry white people that were really pissed off about this because only citizens should be allowed to vote. You know, you're bringing all these Mexican migrants here, and then you're incentivizing their legal migration, which then means that they're further tainting American democracy and American sovereignty, and only citizens should be allowed to vote. Then they start painting these migrants as like, they're like illegal gangbangers, right? Oh, they're gonna come here, they come here, they murder people, they murdered Stephen so-and-so. Oh, they're coming here to rape and pillage your houses. They're eating the cats and dogs. No, you guys, come on, man, you tough crowd. All right.
She showed up dressed like she was ready to perform at the halftime show.
Right. Okay, so Even look at this sign right in the back. We don't really see it entirely, but it says Congress welcomes diseased illegal alien criminals, maybe? This is the way that, and again, white rage, white anger, these are the conservatives. This is where they're positioning themselves here, okay? So then you start getting these ads, these political ads that are like preying on the racial fear of like, there's a crisis at the border and like all of these dangerous gangbanger, drug cartel, illegal migrants are gonna come in and they're gonna rape and pillage America and they're destroying our way of life. This is, Pete Wilson, I think he was running for governor, I believe, in the state of California in '94. I certainly was not old enough to pay attention to this, so I don't have any memory of this ad. But this was an ad campaign that was run by Pete Wilson in 1994. Check this out.
Keep coming. 2 million illegal immigrants in California. The federal government won't stop them at the border. It requires us to pay billions to take care of them. Governor Pete Wilson sent the National Guard to help the Border Patrol. But that's not all.
For Californians who work hard, pay taxes, and obey the laws, I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border. And I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants. Enough is enough.
Governor Pete Wilson.
Okay, so you get ads like that are also like fueling the anti-immigrant sentiment and like connecting them to gangs. MS-13, they come here, they got tattoos on their face, they're thugs, they're here to destroy American life, they don't pay taxes, they don't do anything, and then you have to foot the bill as an American citizen who gets to vote, and then you're paying out, your tax money is going to help these people who don't even belong here. Okay. And then at the same time in 1996, you get Bill Clinton signing the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, or the Welfare to Work Act for short. That's how it's shortened. And this was a bipartisan bill. It was a bipartisan bill that basically Bill Clinton campaigned on this when he ran for president. And he was saying that he's going to end welfare as we've come to know it. And it's time to make America great again. Yes, it was Bill Clinton who said that first, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump just likes to take from the playbooks of Democrats and Republicans to kind of, at least in the first initial start of his campaign, he was borrowing from other politicians in order to make himself into one and make America great again kind of stuck. But Bill Clinton was the one originally saying that.
So he took the slogan and Melania took the speech.
Correct. And so then Bill Clinton here is saying on multiple fronts, we're going to end welfare as we've come to know it. On the immigration front, he's saying we're going to end welfare because there are too many illegal immigrants that are coming in and taking advantage of the welfare, which is going to appeal to conservatives because that's what they want. They don't want their taxpayer dollars going to this illegal immigration thing that fuels lazy immigrants from mooching off of the system. But then at the same time, that same welfare moocher sentiment is being applied to black people too. That like black women are like welfare queens. If you look up the term welfare queen on Google, you'll see what I mean. They're like welfare queens. All they do is they're lazy, they sit around, they have a bunch of kids, and then they mooch off of the system, and then taxpayers got to foot the bill for that. Okay, so this kind of rhetoric of like ending welfare as we have come to know it was like a dog whistle to racist conservatives who really just wanted to stop their taxpayer dollars from sustaining the lives and livelihoods of black and brown people that they deemed to be mooching off of the system. Right? So this appeal, while Bill Clinton is also towing the line with like being, cool with black people because he can play the saxophone, for example, and maybe you guys don't know what I'm saying, but if you look it up, you'll see what I mean. That he kind of toes the line between being like a bipartisan president. He appeals to conservatives, he appeals to progressives, and then on that front, he can kind of enact policies on the basis of racialization. And I would go so far as to say, if this wasn't racist policy, if it wasn't a racial policy, why would these two black women be here? He's trying to sidestep the criticism that the signing of this bill is racist by going, see, I have black people who support me in the signing of this bill. They're not congressional representatives. They're not elected leaders or elected officials of any kind. They're literally just people there to serve as political props so that Bill Clinton can sign this bill into law that restricts them from, it removes him from the criticism that the signing of this bill is racist. Okay? So now, here, what did it do? This act, the Welfare to Work Act, basically put a 5-year limit on welfare access. So now, if you qualify for access to welfare of any kind or government aid, you can only get it for 5 years. Then, in addition to that, in order to qualify for the 5 years of access to that welfare, you have to be a single parent household. That's required. What is that going to do to black families? Split them up. Because if you get audited by the government or you get investigated and you're receiving those benefits and then they do a kind of non-call checkup on you and dad's there at home and he appears like he lives there, well, then you don't get the aid anymore. So then this creates a unique situation where now you know that stereotype of like black people don't have a dad because dad's not home, blah, blah. I know you've seen this on social media. Like jokes around people joking about their father playing catch with their dad and it's an empty chair, something like that. Okay, that is what leads to the creation of this. It is destabilizing black families, but then it is pushing them that in order for these black families to even receive the aid, generally speaking, because dad is the male, dad can't be around. Okay? Then in addition to that, the passing of this act cut federal funding to daycare subsidies. Prior to this period, daycare for most Americans was the equivalent of like $100 a month, $150 a month, something to that effect. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on where you go, where you live, that kind of thing. But there were government subsidies so that, you know, government pays for daycare or subsidizes the cost of daycare so parents can go out and work and do whatever. This cut that. And that subsidy had been there since the time of FDR. So since the 1930s. So now the passing of this bill cuts government funding that had existed for nearly 60 or 70 years or so. And what does that do? It raises the cost of living on people with kids. And then because it creates differential outcomes, it means that black and brown people have to pay more in order to even sustain their lives and have their kids get watched. So like today, daycare can run upwards of like $2,000, $2,500 a month because those government subsidies aren't there anymore. When my daughter was 2 years old, 3 years old, thank God I had my mother-in-law. But by the time she was 2 and 3, my wife and I, we were paying about $1,200, and we thought we were lucky for paying $1,200 for daycare for our daughter. And that's still today. There's no government subsidies for that. So when you have a kid, everybody in this room, whether you're white or black or Asian, thank racism and the government racializing things that didn't need to be racialized so that you have to pay out of pocket for things that the government was actually paying for and no one was complaining about. Now here's the irony. Do you know which racial group has historically benefited from welfare benefits and still overwhelmingly benefits from welfare benefits more than any other racial group in the country? Which racial group is that? It's white people. White people in America receive more welfare benefits than any other racial group in the US. Historically, always have, going all the way back to the time of FDR. And so then they're racializing welfare benefits to say, as taxpayers, we don't want to pay for the welfare benefits of black and brown people.